Good morning, everybody. This is Jeremiah. We're going to have a webinar in a minute here on details. And interesting thing about details is I think they stand for what really make land effects unique. The ability to have this common library of standards and this detail library accessible by any number of users across any number of sheets, detail callouts inside of callouts, references and schedules. It's really is a hallmark feature as much as we're known for planting and irrigation. I think you'll see when it really comes down to it, a lot of people go, man, it's the details. But it's been a lot of hard work over the years. And a lot of users will say the same thing. They go, I want to get into details. How do I get started? Well, that's what this webinar is right here. Brian and I have been working on getting this together. Well, frankly, mostly Brian. Brian, I'm going to hand this over to you, and you're going to show people how to get into details. Take it away. And I think Brian is having some microphone issues, so I will have to continue talking. Sorry for the technical problems here. Um, but we just ran this through, and his headset was fine. So want to remind everyone, while we're just getting that little thing squared away, of course, as you know, there's the questions box. So please feel free to type in your questions there. And since I apparently still have a little bit of time to kill, I'm going to go into some other things real quick, which is the basics of our detail system. Um, Core concept number one is we are going to be inserting details as blocks. There's a huge benefit to having details, each detail being its own independent DWG file, and those individual blocks are placed individually as blocks. So the layers are easier to manage. The file is more portable. Obviously to make that leap to have them not be XREFs and to instead be blocks is to some users is a sea change of difference. But if you are struggling with why would they be blocks and not XREFs, I think very quickly you're going to see the benefit of that. As you can see, we're struggling a bit here getting Brian's computer. Something is going weird with his audio. So we'll get that going. But hey, since it looks like we have a second here getting his darn headset going. Do you know, is it your mute button on your headset? Oh, darn. Huh. Okay, well, there. Do apologize again, everybody. If you can give us a couple of minutes here. In the meantime, please, hey, let's type in some questions while we're getting his audio going to give us an idea of what you're expecting from this webinar, other than functioning audio. But if you could please type in a couple of things. What are some of the takeaways you're wanting to get from this? And as you can see, we also have a great chance here. This isn't a total waste of time. There is our outline right there. As you can see on the right side of the screen, the things that we are going to be covering. So we're going to show you where the details are. We're going to get into the Detail Explorer, talk about organizing there in the Detail Explorer, then get into detail preferences, and then get into what oh, look at that. I hear
Hello?
Brian. We
All
have
right.
you now. Sorry, everybody, and take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Brian, and today we're going to be covering the Land Effects Detail System. The title of this webinar is Introduction to Details as it applies to land effects. So I'm going to be giving you an overview of our system and how it can improve organization and efficiency for your firm. I will, however, do my best to get as in-depth as I can in my hour time slot so I can make this as valuable to all the users who have tuned in today. At any time during my presentation, if you have any questions, as Jer said, feel free to shoot him an IM, and I'll do my best to go at a speed where everybody can follow along with me. So without any further ado, let's talk about what we're going to get into. We're going to talk about the Detail Explorer, which is the detail library. I'm going to do a couple mentions on detail file structure and how it can be important to your firm. Show you how to create details and modify a detail template, what the detail manager does and what role that plays, how to place and edit details, how to reference details in a plan, and then if we have some extra time at the end of it, I'll get into tips and tricks. So the Land Effects Detail Library is a super powerful tool for landscape architects and irrigation designers. The more people that we can have trained in this software, the better we can make it. So please reach out to your manufacturers and get them on board. Let them know about our system and how they should incorporate their details. The more details we can have in our system, the easier it's going to be for all our users to spec products, and they'll save a bunch of time. So let's jump into AutoCAD. And I'm going to open up a new drawing here. And the first thing we want to do is go to the Detail Explorer. Now there's three ways to access the Detail Explorer. The first way is from FX Details, drop down, and click Detail Explorer. That'll prompt you with a dialog box. The other way is to use the FX Details toolbar. Now, if you don't see the FX Details toolbar, the way you can access that is by right-clicking out here in the gray, going to Land Effects, and making sure that Details is selected. And you'll see I'll have this toolbar here, and I can access the Detail Explorer from the second button on this drop-down, and that'll launch that as well. And then the third way is through Detail Preferences. So FX Details, clicking Preferences, and then you see a button over here for Detail Explorer. So I'll click that and launch this. Now, the Detail Explorer dialog box consists of a couple different components. Over here in this large window is the Detail Library. So within the library, we have two master categories. We have Details and we have Standard Details. Standard Details applies to CSI, or Construction Specification Institute, drawings. And you see here, this is a good place to store your typical prototype details, details that aren't specific to a project, but that you reference or use quite a bit. And so you'll see over here on the right side, we also have a detail list of all details within a folder, as well as a detail preview. Now underneath the detail library, you have a few buttons here. So these buttons underneath the detail library apply strictly to the detail library. And so if I want to come in here and create a new division or create a new category, as you can see I have three here. And I forgot to mention, the details section of the detail library is where I put my project-specific details or my personal detail database, as well as we've stored our FX detail library where we will list all of our manufacturers that are in our system. So this is kind of why we are really trying to get more and more manufacturers into our system so that we can include their details, so that all you have to do is come in here and click it and place it into a drawing. So the Detail Explorer, to create a new section, it's important to keep in mind that when you click New, a new category is always going to be created underneath the section that you had selected. So I had details selected, and if I come in here and I want a new category, I'll call it Brian Example. I can also assign a code to this category. Now, codes are really important, and I'll show you why in just a little bit. But for this one, I'm going to say BE, and I'll say OK. And you'll see that now I have a new category created. It doesn't have an expansion or collapse button yet because I don't have any folders underneath it. But as you can see, as you continue to develop, you'll start to build more and more layers. So Land Effects allows for users to have 4 levels of folders. And within those 4 levels, you can do a lot of things. So it's important here to note that you should really sit down with your office and with the group of people that you work closely with and discuss a detail folder structure for your library. There's several different ways. My personal favorite is by client. So I have a folder for my projects, and then inside of that I have a client And then within the client, I'll usually have a couple projects. So I have first, second, and third project, and obviously you would name these according to what the project name is. And then within the project, I have a category of details. So I'll have my hardscape details, my irrigation details, and my landscape details. And I can expand that as far as I want. But you'll see that if I try to create a new category under hardscape, I'm already at my limit of 4, so LandFX isn't going to let me. So let's see here. Okay, so let's look at behind the scenes. So we know how the Detail Explorer works now, and we see that there is this logical breakdown with these codes that are applied. So as I create new, I'm going to create a folder name and a code name. Now, let's look at the detail preferences real quick. So if I go to detail preferences, what I'm going to know is that here is my detail storage folder. So when Detail Explorer is showing me all those file locations and folders, it's being stored in Windows. And here's how I can know where it's being stored. So if I'm on, by default, if I'm on a standalone machine, chances are it's stored under the C drive. And if you're a larger firm with a network, you'll have to find out, ask your IT division where that's stored, but you'll have your LandFX folder stored on a network drive. And by default, we've set this intentionally, and we really encourage you to leave it as is, unless there's just some reason you can't think of, or that you can think of that you would absolutely need to move it. But this is just a storage folder. You can access everything from the Detail Explorer, and now I'm going to show you how this storage folder works. So if
Oh, and real quick, Brian.
Yep.
Well, I'm right with that. The one quick thing on that storage folder, one thing I would recommend is a lot of people say, hey, can I change that to a folder that's backed up by my Dropbox account? And I say, heck yes, that's a brilliant idea. So it's a classic example. Your details are so valuable, and particularly if you're going back and forth between, say, a home and office, and that will instantly allow your detail library to be synced between home and office. So that's a great reason to change that change the detail store folder, or to just simply add that folder to whatever the folders your Dropbox account is syncing.
Absolutely, that's a good point. All right, so to explore the Windows side of how the Detail Explorer is maintained, I'm going to open up Windows. I'm just going to open up over here my Windows Explorer, and you'll see that I'm going to drop down to Computer. I'm going to navigate to that LandFX default folder. And so for me, it was under C LandFX Details. So I'll expand my details. Now, if I open up my details, what you'll see is what looks like a mess of just random numbers, or not numbers in this case, but letters. And so the correlation, though, if you look back over here to the Detail Explorer, is the code. So I have my FX detail library code that I'll open up. And then if I open him up, expand this, you'll notice that each one of these folders created in Windows corresponds with each one of the folders in the FX detail library. Now, if you don't have any details placed under a folder in the detail library, you're not going to see that detail folder listed in Windows. So if I expand further and I continue to go through these codes, what you'll notice, if I switch back over here to Detail Explorer, open up one of these guys, and we'll say O2, is that you'll notice the code for this detail file where it's stored is fxirant emit 02. And that is corresponding with the Detail Explorer over here, which is under my irrigation folder and telco, emitter assemblies, and then I have detail number 2 selected. So that's just a little reference for all our users out there who are wondering where these are saved and how they're being managed. You can always look in Windows and see. And for each detail that's saved with the LandFX Save Detail button, which we'll get into later as well, note that there's three files for each detail. One is the drawing itself. One is the slide, or this preview image you're seeing in the Detail Explorer. Oops. And the other is a data file. So whenever you go to transfer your details and all that, that XML file kind of stores the information with it. So with that, and going over the storage and all that, is there any questions yet, Jer?
there's not any questions, but just one quick note on that is, yeah, that data file, as you're working with details, in some circumstances, we may give you steps on editing that data file directly. So that's kind of a good thing to know about. But otherwise, no questions, so go right ahead.
All right, perfect. All right, so next we're going to look at, now that we have our detail bar over here, the next thing we're going to look at is detail preferences and then get into the detail builder. So what I'm going to do is go to detail preferences and click, yep, so I have details selected. So over here I have a detail template. Now what a detail template is, if I access my, if I access the template button over here, is I'm given these detail modules, or detail templates is another word for them, as they apply to Paperspace. So I'll click here, and you'll see that I get this block border for my detail. So this is the detail template. And we get a lot of questions about how can we customize this template to match our standards, how can we set that as our default. So that's what I want to show you. So by going to the FX details, I'm going to delete this guy and purge him out. FX details preferences, I can click open template. And what that's going to do is open up that base title bar in my detail. So here I have the option, say I want this to be a rectangle, I can draw my rectangle, and I'm doing this roughly. Obviously you would take more consideration and time when doing this. So I can move him, I can match the properties, I can say that I want to get rid of this, I don't like the detail file extension, and that is going to show, based off of that code that I was showing you earlier, this is going to break down that code so that you can easily notice where your file is being saved. But some people don't like that, so I can remove that. I can move my scale over to here if I like, keeping in mind that these pink little cross hatches are the limits of my detail. And don't worry about how long the detail is, that's automatically taken care of by Land Effects. And I'll show you that in just a bit. So there's a couple other features that you can add. I can add a non-plot scale if I want it for my records. So a lot of times users will come in here and they'll set that layer to non-plot, and then they'll remove this one if they want to have NTS on all their details. So I can say NTS here, and that way the user knows which detail template was created. But as far as being portrayed on the plans, is maybe my detail's not to scale, I can just use NTS over here. So I'll remove all this, and then I'll just do a zoom extents, and I will do a save. So I'm just going to do File and Save. Then I can close out of there. And now what you'll notice is if I go to add the detail template, oops, wrong button, my updates have been changed accordingly. So now I have a customized detail title block. So that's how you would customize the detail title block for your office.
And then with that, Brian, is, yeah, also if people notice the width and height setting there, and that's why we keep those little non-plot tick marks in that title block, so that as you change, if you do want to change the width or height of your frame, you have those non-plot marks to help with doing that.
Correct, yeah. So you'll notice that title block will take, if I choose a different size, that title block will still take effect with a different size. So, are there any questions with customizing title blocks so far?
No questions. I'm wondering if people are just in awe or don't know where the question box is. So I know people have some questions, they just haven't gotten around to them. So do please, like I said, I'm here to answer any questions, typing, even while Brian can keep going. So if you do have any things you've run into in customizing these things, feel free to type them in, because we do want some feedback from you guys. But go for it, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about the Detail Builder toolbar. Now, you're going to do the same thing if you don't see your Detail Builder loaded on your screen. To load that, you right-click out here in the gray, choose Land Effects, and go down to Detail Builder. Make sure that's checked, and you'll see it pop up in the middle of your screen. And so I have a few toolbars here that I want to go over with you, all based off of building toolbars. And so this is building details. So this is going to get into how to create your own detail. So I have some annotation tools over here on the left. Keep in mind that all these are organized by task. So I have my dimensions, I have my detail actual building, and I have my annotations over here. Now I'm only going to go into a couple of these since this is an introduction tour, but like Jared said, feel free to shoot us an email or shoot a question in the box and we can answer about some other ones. So the first one I want to look at is detail blocks. Now, what we've provided in Land Effects is a storage of detail blocks, and you can always add to these and customize them as you like. If you have more blocks than we have, feel free to send them over to us and we can incorporate them in the system, or you can put them in your own system. So for example, if I wanted to create a detail of a masonry wall, I come in here, and this works very similar to our site where we have all these blocks, but I can come over to Section, and I can place a detail block. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to place him, and I'm just going to get real close. Like I said earlier, you would obviously spend a little bit better quality on your details than I'm doing just for the sake of rushing a presentation. And so now I have the fundamental components of my masonry wall. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to FX Admin and load a layer state. Or if I go back to my detail toolbar, you'll notice that we also have layer states right next to the detail blocks because you can see they go well together. So I'll click the layer state button and I'll select a layer state, and you can customize these as you wish to. I'm just going to use the default Land Effects details. And what you'll notice before I do that is I have only the layers listed in these blocks loaded into my drawing now. But if I come over here, load my layer state, you can see I'm automatically populated with all the detail layers that I need to get going drawing my detail for any additional line weights or anything like that. So I'm going to draw in some rebar here just real quick. And I'm going to just a real quick sketch of this detail. And then I'm going to change my layer and I'm going to put in a footing for my detail like that. So now I have pretty much the base components of my detail as I wish to see it. So now I'm ready to insert it into a detailed template so that I can insert it into my plans. So what I'll do is I'm going to verify my units, and they are in inches. Okay, great. So then I'm going to come over to this detail template button, and I'm going to insert a detailed template. Now I want this to appear, one important thing to keep note of here, and if I can, let me try to open up another file and show you how this works, is detail sheets. So within Land Effects, we've built in, if I have a regular standard title block here, what we've built in is a grid function for placing details. So I'm going to use my grid by going to the same button as the insert detail template, but just to the right of it you'll see is insert sheet template. So I'll click that, and you can see that by doing that I'm being given a non-plot on a grid. And so this helps me identify how many details I can fit onto a grid and all that. Now if I go to Window and I tile it, what I want to show you here is, I hope everybody can see the green on my screen, is now when I go to insert a detailed template, I'm given this dialog box. And as it applies, if you're a company that's using 24 by 36 or 22 by 34, any of those size paper, then you're not going to worry about 1D, 2D, 3D, and 4D. So just act as if those are red and inaccessible. Now, if you come up here, you'll see that 1A corresponds, these 1A through 4C correspond with my sheet file. So to be a little more clear, let me just real quickly draw over here is 1A. And I'm going to scale that up so everybody can see it. So I have 1A, and down here I have 4C. And now when I go back to insert a detail template, this might make a little more sense. So you can see that this is the size of the module that you're going to be placing in model space and how it's going to relate to paper space. So I want this detail to be scaled to fit 1A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select 1A, and then I'm going to come over here and select a size that I think is appropriate. I'm working in inches, so I'm not going to select decimal units. And I'm going to say OK. And I can see that that one's a little big. So then what I'm going to do is maybe drop the scale a little bit, and that one seems to be about right once I get all my annotations and everything like that in there. So I'm just going to say OK and click it. Now you can see that I have a detail template surrounding my detail, and what I can do is, using the Land Effects buttons, I'm going to come over here to this toolbar, and I'm going to say Save Detail. And it's going to say Select Detail. Whoop, what's going on with that? So I'm going to say where I want to save it, I suppose. So I'm going to save it under my first project. I'm going to save it under Hardscape, and I'm going to select that folder, and then it's going to say title this detail. Now watch this detail title down here as I do this. So I'm going to say this is going to be example detail 1. And I can say here it was drawn by me, and it was checked by Jeremiah. And then I can add it to a project if I want. So for example, I already added this to a project, but if I go back a step and I save it again, this time I'm going to save it underneath my just general detail prototype library. So we'll call that this one. So I'll say here, and I'm going to call this one prototypes and say OK. So I'm going to save it under there. And I'm also going to say add to project. So this time. So now I'm going to say this is called Brian example 1, drawn by me, checked by Jeremiah. I can add some description notes here. This is an example detail. And then I can also add it to project. Now it's going to drop down and say select a project. Well, I don't have a project yet, so I'm just going to save it to tutorial 1. And this is going to save it to my detail manager, which we're going to get into in a second. And I'll say OK. Now your detail has been saved, and you may discard any changes. So now there's no need to save this detail. I can just close out. It'll say, do you want to change your drawings? No, because I've already saved them. Now, one important thing to remember when saving details is, especially in Land Effects, is to always use the Land Effects Save Detail, Edit Detail, and Update Detail buttons. What this is going to do, for example, when I come back to this later on and say I want to edit this detail, I want to add some annotations, all that. What I'm going to do is say, okay, I'm ready to save this detail again in my prototypes, for example. It didn't ask me to overwrite that time. Interesting. So let me close out and back up a second. All right. So if I go to FX Admin, I'm going to start a new project file here, just because I forgot to do that a second ago. So I'm going to call this 01, my first project. And now I have this. So I can, backing up a little bit, I can set my detail folder here if I want, but I'm not going to yet because I'm going to show you a common error that we get here at Land Effects and how that's a result of that. So with that, let's go back into our Detail Explorer and I'll show you how to edit that detail that I just opened. So I'm going to say, no, I don't want to save changes to that. I'm going to open up a new drawing. I'm going to access my Detail Explorer, and I'm going to open up this prototype. Now, the cool thing about this this detail library is I have a couple options. So by right-clicking my detail, I can open it by editing it. I can delete it if I decide I don't want it, or I can print it, which is really cool. So I'll show you that in just a little bit. So right now I'm going to edit, and now I have my detail edited. And what I can do is I want to add some annotations. So going back to the detail builder, I'm going to explore a couple different annotation options. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the leader with text, specify an offset, and then I can type an offset. So I'm going to say CMU block. And then you can see that that text is automatically inserted. Now, what's cool about Land Effects, if I were to take this same detail, and I'm going to copy it over here, I'm going to make it a little bit taller, just for this example, extend my rebar. Oops. Now say that I want to make this on a bigger template. what I can do is I can use my drop down and select Insert Detail Template, and this time I want this to be on a 1B or a 2B maybe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the scale of it. So that one was at that. So now you can see this is just for a dramatization, we'll say, but I have a much larger detail template that I want to create now. And so you'll notice that if I zoom in on this screen and I do the same thing, my text is automatically scaled. So there's no need for the AutoCAD annotative scaling. So I can say CMU wall, and it's automatically drawn to the same scale. So that's a nice little feature that goes in between details. Another feature with annotating is the detail bubble callouts, which is my personal favorite. So I'm going to use the detail bubble callouts and select a detail boundary. This is because I have multiple details on the same drawing and LandFX doesn't know how to recognize. Now you'll see that's because I have multiple details showing on my screen. But if I zoom in and make this detail have the priority of my screen, LandFX automatically realizes that this is the detail I'm working in. So that's kind of a neat feature. So here what I'm going to do is say I'm going to CMU block, and I'll say OK, and I'll place this one. And now I'm just going to point to him and annotate him. And then by right-clicking, I get right back into it. So I'm going to say footer, and I'm going to place this detail, or I'm sorry, this callout here, and do that number. And then I'm going to add one more, which is just rebar. And I'm going to place him. Call him out right there, and do that. So now I have details 1 through 3 on my drawing. Now what I can do as a cool feature is right-click, go back into my detail bubble callout, select detail boundary, and now I want to switch the order of the way those are called out. So now when I click schedule, you'll see it automatically renumbers, and I can create a schedule. Define the limits of my schedule right there. So now I have a schedule within my detail that calls out accurately what the components of my detail are. Now, I also want to annotate this detail, but I don't want to have to do all that again. So what I can do is copy over these bubble callouts into this detail, zoom in, and I'll turn off my ortho, do this, and now when I'm working in this detail, if I go to call out, all those detail bubble callouts are still already there. So I'm going to call out my CMU block, and you'll notice what just happened, if I place this guy too, is that it automatically adjusted for the scale of my my callouts and my detail. So zooming back, you'll see that now there's a difference between the size of these detail bubbles over here and these detail bubbles over here. So LandFX recognizes to automatically scale based off of this detail scale established here. So that's a really neat feature for saving details in LandFX. But now that I have my details saved, looks like that one got disassociated, so I'm just going to recall out the footer. And I'm going to say schedule and just update that schedule. And so now I'm ready to save my detail again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the save detail. And this is where it's going to say, do you want to overwrite the existing detail or prompt for a new detail? Now this is important because if I'm working in a detail prototype and I notice there's an error, say I had a typo or a missing dimension, I could always come back and overwrite that. But in this case, if this was my original detail prototype and I didn't have and I had all the annotations right, and I just had to tweak something like add a specific type of cap or change the footer of this detail, I'm going to create a new one. So I'll say new, and I'll be prompted right back here. And that's where it comes in. That's why using the LandFX Save Detail button is important, because if I simply do a Control S with while working in a LandFX detail, it's going to automatically execute the overwrite command. Some additional benefits are every time you use the Save Detail button, it's automatically going to reshoot those 3 files we looked at, the actual DWG, the slide file or the preview file, and the data file. So those are going to be reshot every time you use the Save Detail button. So it's nice to keep up to date. So this time I'm going to add it into my actual project. So I'm going to save this under actual project, and I'm going to select it. I want it all the same information. I'm going to say edited just so I know. And I will say I'm going to add it to my first project. So I'll say save. Everything has been changed. I can do that. Now if I also want to come in and dimension later on, because I forgot to, I can come in and dimension. AutoCAD or LandFX automatically understands my dimension style based off of what I've set. So to set a dimension style, basically what you're going to do is come into dim style, take your dim style desired, you're going to modify it, make your changes accordingly, and then from there, with that dim style active, you're going to come up to FX Details, Preferences, and click Save Dim Style. LandFX will automatically understand that you're trying to save a dim style. It'll pull the information from your dim style manager, and over here you can see which ones have been saved and which ones have not been saved. So if one of these is unchecked, you simply just click Save, and you'll see that LandFX saves it. So anytime I go to dimension in meters using the metric system, LandFX will automatically recognize that and apply that to my detail template. So I'm done here, so I'm going to close out of here and say no. And now I'm going to see if there's any questions, since that was kind of a little bit of information, see if anybody wants me to revisit a topic or go over something again a little bit slower.
No, actually, I was able to get to the bevy of questions that came in. We did have a number of people asking about M leaders and reminding them that that is coming up soon. We were just testing out some M leader code the other day, which is pretty exciting. But otherwise, some simple questions on the layering and how the detail grid works. So keep going and keep these questions coming in. And if I'm not answering your question fully, or you want Brian to answer the question live on the webinar, go ahead and type it in again.
All right, great. So let's get over to the detail manager, and then we're going to get into placing details. This is really where the power of the system is going to show through to a bunch of the users, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a sheet file that I've prepared. So I have this detailed, I'm sorry, I have just a generic title block on my sheet file set up to 24 by 36, and I'm ready to start laying out and placing my details. So to do that, the first thing to remember is going to be how to get those details into the system. So oftentimes we'll have a user go through and go to FX Details, and they're ready to go to their detail manager. So they'll open up the project, and over here they might not have any projects associated. So they'll say New, and then this dialog box comes up. And then oftentimes they'll wonder where their standard detail library is and why this looks different than the Detail Explorer. What this is asking for is saying to select a project. So it works very similar to the planting manager, the irrigation manager, and the ref notes manager. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go to my LandFX project folders. I'm going to select the client folder that I'm working in, and I'm going to select this first project because that's the project folder I'm working in. I can always come through and drag and drop these in here later. So I'm going to say OK. And just like that, I'm brought to the Detail Explorer version of Detail Manager. So I'm going to come in here, and I already have a bunch of preloaded details into my hardscape folder. Now, to do that, what I did earlier on was go to FX Details in my Detail Explorer. Now I pulled from my manufacturer database. For example, for irrigation, I can come over here to my irrigation dropdown, and I can say, okay, I know I'm going to need an emitter for my project. So I look through here, and I have a list of all my manufacturer's details and parts. I can easily come over here and say, all right, I want the pinch strip. So what I'll do is just drag and drop that detail into that folder. And you'll notice LandFX automatically copies that detail into my project folder now. So that's the power of having manufacturers in our system, is that ease of convenience for just bringing over details instead of having to go to a website, log in, download them, talk to manufacturer representatives, make sure you're getting the right detail. We want to have them all listed here for our users to use. So I'm also going to need a valve, so I'll put in my valve over here, and I'm going to drag that guy in like that. And that's just a new bug. So if you're not seeing this as you're following along, that's because we are rolling out with an update today. And I believe Jeremiah has already fixed that error, but you'll see that it should have already copied it. So this is something that's coming out uh, with an update, hopefully sooner than later, and we'll be able to copy
Yeah,
this up.
sorry. If you edit the detail first, it'll copy it. That's all. It didn't download it before copying it. That's
Right.
all.
So that's that. But so I went through, and that's how I populated my hardscape folder, which is what I'm going to be showing you how to place today. Is simply just going to manufacturers and dragging and dropping their details into my project folder, and it's creating a copy. So for example, make it a little more clear, if I come down to concrete, or I'm sorry, masonry, and I use this concrete CMU, and I want a split face, what I can do is the same thing, is drag this over and put this into a project folder. So I'll put it in landscape. And then LandFX is going to say, do you want to copy it or do you want to move it? Obviously, I want to copy it because that's my detail library, and I don't want to affect the standard detail. I want to modify this prototype. So right now I'm going to say no because I don't need to. And I'm going to go back to my detail manager. So here I'm going to say new. And now that I'm already synced up here, I can add all of these details that I've chosen by just simply saying Shift and click and select them all. I don't want to copy these to a project detail folder right now because they're already in there. And I'll say add to project. And when I click done, LandFX automatically sends all of those details into my detail manager for this project. So now the next thing I want to do is set up that detail grid. Now you can set this as your template in your actual title block file if you like. So that's what I'm going to do, is do open xref, and I'm in my title block, and I'm going to create a non-plot layer. So over here in my layers, I'm going to say I want a new layer, and I'm going to call this L Anno non-plot. I'm going to change the color just so everybody can see it to a red, and say OK. And then I'm also going to make sure it's a non-plot. So now by setting this layer active, what I like to do is come in here and draw a rectangle right within the display of my sheet. And then I'm just going to do a simple offset, and I'm going to go through, and it doesn't have to be exact, but I just want a little breathing room with my details. So I'm going to say OK. Now when I save this guy, close out of him, and if I go to my X references, I can reload this X reference. And I see now I have a non-plot rectangle, and this is kind of my workspace for my details. So flipping back over to the details, what I'm going to do is insert my detail toolbar, or I'm sorry, my sheet template. So by doing that, now I can select the corner of this non-plot, and I can drag out this grid. And I can say there. That way now I know I have a nice and centered grid. This grid is also on a non-plot, that's important to note. But now I have a nice and centered grid where I can place my details professionally and accurately. So now I'm going to go back over to my detail manager, and I'm ready to start placing my details on this sheet. So I'm going to start here, and actually I don't want this irrigation one in there just yet, so I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to place. It's going to ask me for a sheet number. Now if you have fields that are associated with your title block, or you have any other data that's populated over here, you always want to make sure you're maintaining accuracy there. For example, for me, this is going to be L400. So I'm going to say L400, and I'm going to call this my detail sheet, and say OK. And LandFX is going to say, is this detail number 1? I'm going to say yes. So then I can just come in here and easily snap. I can then use my down arrows and my up arrows to select the next one, hit enter again because it automatically recognizes this is detail number 2, and I can do this. So you can see how easy it is to come through here and place details on a sheet. So there's no more viewports needed, no more confusion. Oops, that one doesn't belong, so I'm just going to cancel him. That was a little big. Come back in here, and I'm going to remove him because I don't want him in there. And I'll continue placing my details until I fill up my sheet. So this is how easy it is, and you can see how much time can be saved with placing details in the land effects system. Now, I have these details placed on a sheet. I'm going to save my sheet. What I'm also going to do is start on a new sheet. So I want to place more details over here. This one I'm going to place on this sheet, and I'm going to call this one L401, and this sheet title is going to be Details Sheet 2, and say OK. And this is going to be detail number 1 on this sheet. I'm going to say OK right there, and I'm going to continue placing details as I did earlier, automatically numbering, automatically placing, and we'll say there. So that's all I have for right now. Now you can see what the detail manager is doing is it's organizing the details that I've placed by sheet. So I have L401, L400. These are my details. Here's a preview, and this is what sheet they're located on. Now, if I want to add a new detail later on, I can come back in here and say, okay, now I want to add this chain link fence. So I'll say add to project and say done. You can see up here under details, these are my unplaced details. These are the details that I have not placed on a sheet yet and do not belong. But as soon as I click place, I can come down here and I can place him. He's automatically filed onto the correct sheet. So that's a nice little handy tool. So that is placing details. Are there any questions, Jer?
Nope, no questions. Go ahead.
All right, so we'll continue on. So now let's look at how to reference these details when they're placed onto when they're called out on a sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this, I had a project file in here earlier. Excuse me real quick while I find that. And I believe it's under Documents. And it's actually going to be listed under my, well, I'll tell you what I'll do, is I'm going to go to Computer, C, Land Effects, and I'm just going to open up one of these tutorial projects. And we'll open up just a planting plan, for example, for right now. So this is a planting plan, and what I'm going to do is associate this project with my first project. And you can see here now I have listed my sheet index. So I have L400, L401, and I can always modify these if I wanted to. I could edit the name of this, I could edit where it's saved, or the sheet number. So that's nice and convenient. What I'm going to do is say OK, and I'm going to start calling out details. So I have a detail callout toolbar over here. Again, you can access that if you don't see it by your Land Effects dropdown and selecting Detail Callout. So what I'm going to do is I have an option for Insert Callout Placeholder, Insert Detail Callout, Associate Callout, and Update Callout. So right now, I'm going to show you how to insert a detail placeholder. So by clicking that, I have all sorts of options for different types of callouts. I can also include a detail callout or a detail title out to the side. I'll do that now just to show you what it's like. So I'll say I'm going to use this one, and I'm going to point to this stone right here. Detail title is going to be stone detail. This is just a reminder for me right now. I'll click OK. So then I'm automatically have this little note out here. I can also include a ref note if I have one with that. Now what I do know is that I have another detail, which is, we'll say, I'm going to have a drinking fountain in my plans. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to call this out. So my drinking fountain might be located up here near the steps. So I'm going to say right here is the drinking fountain. And automatically, Land Effects loads the detail number that it appears on my sheet, what sheet it's on, as well as the detail title. So that's nifty. Now to go back to this one, I've realized, oh, I remember I did put that detail in my plans, and I'm ready to associate it. So I'll click the Associate Callout button, and I'll click the callout, and I'm going to say this is going to be my curb, and say OK. And then automatically, just like that, the title is updated, the detail location and callout is updated and ready to go. So now, automatically gone through and associated my callouts. Now, another thing is, how do I get, once I click this, I continue to get this same the same detail callout style. And really, I want to change it. This time I want to do a section cut. So what you can do is when accessing this is select your detail, click OK, and then just before placing it, if you right click, you'll be prompted back to this window. And this time I don't want to include a detail title, but I do want to include a section cut. So for there, I'll just draw my section cut. This, I'll specify the direction, and Land Effects automatically updates that. So by re-entering the command, going back here, saying OK, I'm done with my section cut, I can right click, and now I can just do an enlargement area maybe. So I'll specify my enlargement area, and then I'll call out my enlargement area, and just like that, I'm called out. So that's kind of how you would label your details in a plan, how you'd call out your details. That we got about 10 minutes left. Are there any question and answers we'd like to go over, or would you just like me to show you some useful tips and tricks that I have used in the past for myself, or what's kind of the status?
Yeah, I don't have a thought on any of these questions to show, so yeah, maybe go ahead and show a couple other little tips and tricks, and people, please, why don't you drop in some more questions, and I'll get them queued up here for Brian to show.
Okay, great. So over here in FX Details, if I go to Preferences, one thing that's important to remember is this Copy Details to Project Folder button. So with that, I like to leave it unchecked a lot of the times because I like to manually drag and drop my details. But for a lot of people, they like to copy this detail to project folder, and they'll say, okay. So what that'll do is when I go to my detail manager and I say I want a new one, what I can do is come down to masonry, for example, and I can select my wall, and I can also click this browse button, and this will show me a preview of all of the details listed in there. So if I click that and I click add to project, what it's done is it's already added that into my project folder. So now you can see that that's there. So it's automatically created a copy of that detail in my project folder, which is handy if you're not the kind of person who likes to go through and manually do that. My personal way of doing it is I like to manually drag and drop just so I can make sure that I'm being 100% accurate, but everybody likes to do things a little bit differently. So that's one tip. Another tip is we get a lot of questions about how can I create a detail of an X reference. And so my answer to that is simply to do an X trim. So for example, if I unload a bunch of this stuff here, I'm going to unload him really quick just for clarity and wipe him out. And now when I go back, reload, so I have this, and I want to include a detail enlargement of an area here. So what I can do is go over to my detail template, and I'll identify, whoops, I'm sorry, wrong button. I'll identify how large I want my template to be. So in this case, I want it to be, I want it a little bit larger since it is an enlargement, and I want it scaled at maybe 1 to 10. So I'll click OK. It might be a little bit small, so I'll go a little bit bigger size, and I want to blow up this enlargement here. So what I'll do is I'll say there, and then what I'll do, just for sake of this tutorial, is I'll rotate this drawing to be more, to be oriented in a way that's a little bit more legible. So I can do this, and now I have my detail template. I have the X reference located around, but I don't want all this stuff showing around it. So what I can do is move this up just a little bit higher, and I'm going to draw a rectangle in here just to give me a little bit of breathing room. And then from there, I'm going to execute a command called xtrim. And it's going to say pick a polyline. So I'm going to pick a polyline and specify a side to trim on. And I believe if I select the outside, I cannot trim this object. Xtrim. Pick a polyline as a cutting edge. There we go. Oh, so it seems to be having difficult trimming my object. Any idea why, Jer? Hmm. Well, it's worked in the past, so I know that it does work, but that's a strange one. So if I do that, let's see if that works. No, for some reason it doesn't want to trim my X reference. Well, okay, so let's scratch that tip because that isn't going to work. But play around with it and see what you can do if it'll work for you.
But but yeah, there it is. I've seen multiple people who've asked, can they put a XREF in a detail, and that's a good idea. If you're doing the key map sort of a detail is a good usage of it. Things like that.
Right, correct. All right, so with that, I will leave it up to questions if there's no more questions, and I think we can wrap it up. But I just want to remind everybody about the Detail Explorer one more time. To reach out to your manufacturers, no matter how big or small they are, let them know that we have this capability, and if you think it would be valuable to you, to have this library over here with site manufacturers, bench manufacturers, playground manufacturers, so on, to let them know to give us a call that you would like to see their details in our system, and we can easily incorporate them so that you can easily place them and don't have to worry about spending hours upon hours doing product specification. So with that, any questions before we wrap it up?
You had a couple people who were offering that perhaps X clip would have worked instead of X trim.
That's a good point. Let me,
Could have been what it was.
might have been it.
Then we had a couple of people mentioning, changing of scale and things with the detail template boundary. Sounds like we got a good number of people who've been, using the system, which is great. And Brian and I were talking about what a potential follow-up webinar will be, getting into more intermediate level, advanced level kind of topics, like putting detail callouts inside of a detail, all the various customization options with the detail template, getting more into the cross-referential system. For instance, you can generate reports of details. You can generate a report of details showing all the sheets that detail is called out on. If capability like that interests you, do let us know so we can kind of outline up what our sort of follow-up webinar would be. Yeah, I too am kind of at a loss. I think that was a really great detail for, or really great webinar for showing off the detail system. Many thanks for everybody, and have a great weekend. Any last words, Brian?
Not that I can think of. Like I said, feel free to check out our new documentation up at landeffects.com/docs. We're constantly updating that and adding new information to it. So if you have any feedback for us on that, as well as feel free to shoot me an email with feedback of today's webinar, because like I said earlier in the beginning of this webinar, is I definitely want to make this as valuable to the users as possible. We're talking about doing a training series, broken down videos, and just ways to communicate the detail system to make it more valuable. We're really excited about the future of details with Land Effects. So with that, I will wrap this up. Thank you, everybody.